always say that I can read a person like a book, and that's kind of true. I really can look at a person and kind of get a feel for them pretty quickly when I first meet them. And it turns out there may be a certain amount of science to that, but it's science that, in my opinion, you should always take with a grain of salt. Is it possible to recognize someone from the dark triad of personality disorders, which does include narcissism, just by looking at them, by their facial features? If so, how do you do it, and what's that all about? Several studies have proven that it's possible, and that sometimes we can look at a person and just know that there's something a little off about them and that they may be among these dark triad personalities. And that's what we're talking about today at queenbeing.com. Whether or not it's possible to tell someone's a narcissist, a psychopath, or someone who has machiavellianism just by looking at their faces. So let's get started. My name is Angie Atkinson, and on this channel I offer free daily video coaching to help you discover, understand, and overcome narcissistic abuse in toxic relationships. I like to call it toxic relationship rehab. So if that sounds good to you, hit that subscribe button and we'll get going. Now, before I get started, I just want to tell you, just make sure you stick around to the end of this video when I'm going to let you take this test for yourself. How do you know when someone is a narcissist or a psychopath or has Machiavellianism just by looking at their face? Let's talk about it. Even though I think it is possible to get a split-second instinct about someone, it's always important to remember to think logically before jumping into any relationship, because you can't always tell by a person's facial features. With that being said, I hope this information will be helpful for you. As human beings, we have a certain amount of ability that has evolved over time, over generations, that allows us to look at a person and know instantly whether or not that person might be dangerous. But like I said, take it with a grain of salt, because logic and general caution is always important in any situation. The fact is that within milliseconds of seeing someone's face, researchers tell us that we can actually form an instant kind of impression of that person. Even before we can consciously perceive it, we get kind of a feeling in our gut, don't we? Our brains immediately and automatically make a judgment about a person just by the way they look. Now, personally, I've experienced some interesting side effects of this. When I was a lot heavier, I got treated a lot differently. People in general weren't as nice to me, treated me less kindly, let's say. And these days, I'm a little bit more kindly regarded. Now, I'm not saying I'm so attractive, but certainly getting a little bit physically healthier has been beneficial to me socially with strangers. In general, studies have found that people who have higher inner eyebrows and prominent cheekbones are more trustworthy than those who don't. Take a look at this picture for reference. Is there an actual correlation between these things, or is this just kind of what we think? Is there actually a correlation between those types of facial features and trustworthiness? Interestingly enough, apparently there is. So researchers at Cornell University did this study where they showed people faces of Caucasian men without facial hair, without scars or tattoos, and they asked them to figure out whether or not they thought they were criminals, and if they knew what type of criminals they might be, or were they not criminals. They all had neutral facial expressions. Some were criminals and some were not. So the results of the studies found that, in fact, most people can tell whether or not someone's a criminal. Want to take the test yourself? Take a look at this. Grab a pen and a piece of paper and prepare yourself to take this test. I'm going to quickly show you 15 faces. I want you to write down the numbers, and feel free to pause the video to look at each face. Look at each face and write down whether you think they're a criminal or not a criminal, and write down if you can tell what their crime might have been if you do think they're a criminal. So let's do it. Here's number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11, number 12, 13, 14, 15. So now that you've seen the faces, tell me, which ones do you think were the criminals and which ones do you think were not? Well, stay tuned to the end of this video and I will show you the answers. So what is the Dark Triad exactly? Just for your reference, the Dark Triad is focused on three main personality traits, of course, narcissism, machiavellianism, and psychopathy. The use of that term implies that people who have these traits have malevolent qualities. So this is used in applied psychology, especially when it comes to law enforcement, clinical psychology, and business management. Those who score high on these traits are more likely to commit crimes, cause social problems, distress, and generally create really hard problems for relationships, organizations, etc. The three traits are conceptually distinct, but evidence shows that they do overlap. So they're associated with a sort of callous, manipulative, interpersonal style. As you know, narcissism is characterized by things like grandiosity, pride, egotism, and generally a lack of empathy. Machiavellianism is characterized by manipulation and exploitation of other people, a pretty cynical disregard for morality, and then a lot focus on self-interest and deception, while psychopathy is all about antisocial behavior, impulsivity, selfishness, lack of remorse, and callousness. Next up, we're going to talk about how you can actually see the dark triad in a person's face. There was a study done at Washington University in St. Louis. Actually, you know what? Take a look at this. A couple of researchers over at Washington University here in St. Louis, named Nicholas Holtzman and Michael Strube, were thinking about what is the relationship between physical attractiveness and those people's tendencies toward narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Well, they wanted to find out whether or not these three traits, which we call the dark triad, were associated with a person's ability to successfully enhance their appearance. So they went ahead and they invited 111 college students, 64% of whom were female, into the lab, and each student was photographed as they arrived. After that, they asked the students to change out of their clothing and put on a plain old pair of gray sweats and a t-shirt. Women were asked to remove their makeup and to pull their hair back into ponytails if it was long hair. Then the same students were photographed in this state. Well, the researchers showed both sets of photographs to another group of students who rated them in terms of physical attractiveness. Interestingly enough, the attractiveness ratings of both sets of students determined that each student was able to make themselves more appealing through flashy clothes, makeup, accessories, etc., and to what level that was. As the two researchers assessed their personalities and their tendencies toward narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, they asked the students to go ahead and rate themselves and to offer email addresses for some of their friends so that researchers could kind of get some feedback on their ratings as well. Well, the combination of their own ratings and their peer ratings were used to calculate a final set of personality scores for each student, and their own ratings on narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, they used it to create a dark triad score. As it turned out, while the dark triad score was positively correlated with the dressed up attractiveness, that's a finding that mirrors previous findings, the dark triad score was not related to ratings of physical attractiveness when it came to the dressed down photos. So what does that mean? Well, it means that those people with dark personality traits are not seen as more physically attractive when you take away their freedom to wear their own clothing and makeup. But people with dark personalities do seem to be much better at making themselves physically appealing when they can choose their own clothing and makeup. So Holtzman said he wanted to find out exactly whether or not the dark triad could be seen in facial feature. The results found that the people looking at the photos were able to reliably detect the dark triad in people, especially the females. Researchers determined that the faces of people with these types of personalities tend to kind of morph on a certain level. Basically, they figured out that people who were looking at the photos could reliably detect the dark triad in these faces. They could detect who was of the darker personality type, especially using neutral expressions on faces, which I found very interesting. Another note, though, is that some researchers say that it's possible for someone who is attempting to manipulate or lie to someone else to change the way they're holding their face, the facial expressions, in order to appear more trustworthy. So again, you have to take all of this with a grain of salt. So what are we supposed to make out of all of this stuff? Are we supposed to assume that when we have a bad first impression of someone, they are a bad person, or that when we have a good first impression of someone, they must automatically be a good person? I think we all know the answer to that. You got to proceed with caution. The fact of the matter is, no matter what you think or feel when you first meet a person, it's always smart to proceed with caution, even if they look like the nicest person you've ever met. You and I can both probably remember a time when we met someone, a narcissist, who appeared to be someone we could trust. And as time went on, we very quickly or very slowly learned that we could not trust them. So I find this study very fascinating because you guys know I'm such a nerd about all this psychology stuff. But bottom line, I don't think that there's any way to just look at a person's face and know for sure. Tell me what you think. What it all comes down to, if you put it all together, is that people who do have the dark personality traits are capable of making themselves look more attractive, and they're also capable of morphing their faces to appear more trustworthy. So unless you can catch them with a neutral expression when they're not trying to attempt to manipulate you, chances are you might not get a valid impression anyway. As promised, here are the answers to your quiz. So number 1 is not a criminal. Number 2 is a drug dealer. Number 3, an assailant. Number 4, a rapist. Number 5, and number 6, not criminals. Number 7, an arsonist. Number 8, a drug dealer. Number 9, a rapist. 10, rapist. 11, not a criminal. 12, not a criminal. 13, an arsonist. 14, not a criminal. 15, an assailant. So how'd you do? Most people were right about 60% of the time. They couldn't exactly tell what type of criminal they were dealing with, but they could tell that someone was a criminal. With all of that being said, there is one important finding that we need to discuss. In both of the experiments, women could not spot the ones who were rapists. They consistently rated convicted rapists less likely to be criminal than not only other types of criminals, but non-criminals as well. It's pretty puzzling, but it makes sense if you think about it, because as the study authors explained in the paper, in order to be successful in that horrible venture, the man must be able to fool her, the woman, and earn her trust initially. So those who did fit the bill by sort of looking like someone who would do that, or who would look otherwise dangerous or criminal, would have a harder time getting close enough to a woman to do that. This is possibly why women and not men are unable to spot these people, even though women are equally as good at spotting other types of criminals as men. That brings me to the question of the day. And the question of the day is, what do you think about all of this? Do you think it's possible to look at a person and say, hey, that's an evil person and that person's not an evil person? Or do you think this is just kind of an interesting thing to think about? Share your thoughts and your ideas in the comment section below and your experiences, and tell me what you think. Let's have a good discussion about this. This brings me to the Daily 7, where I feature 7 or so comments that were posted yesterday on my YouTube channel by you guys. Take a look. All right, that's all I've got for you right now. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. I'll see you soon. It's my mission to teach others what I know to be true. You really can create the life you want. Take care of your body, take care of your soul, nurture the real you, and introduce him or her to the world. Be comfortable in your own skin and in your place in this world. Take your spot, take it now, and the universe will take its cue from you. You feel me? If so, subscribe to my channel. Let's get it done together.